Hello, or should I say bonjour, as today I brought the property show with me to the Pyrenees in the southwest of France. I talked to Tony Burt, a real estate agent who lives and works in the area and himself made the move to France from Australia 16 years ago. We talk about the buying process, what opportunities are out there and what to expect when you have made the move. Later in the show I interview Felicity Sullivan, an international mortgage broker who assists non-French buyers in financing their purchases in the beautiful country which is France. Tony, how are you today?
I'm doing very well, thanks, mate. Yourself?
Fantastic.
Excellent.
So, before we came on air, there we were speaking about your experiences and what brought you to France. Let's talk a little about you. How long have you been living in France? Because by your accent, you're not French, are you?
No, I'm from Australia originally. I've lived in France now for 16 years. I came to France with my work. I was working in Asia, and I took a posting into Paris. So I lived in Paris 5 years. That then circumstances changed. So then I bought a property in the Charente, east of Bordeaux, which is very popular with foreign buyers. A lot of Brits are there.
Yeah. The Port de Charente? Is that the right
no, well, that's the region.
Yeah.
So near the Dordogne. I'm sure a lot of your listeners may have heard of the Dordogne.
Yeah.
I was there for 3 years. We did like everyone does, which is find a property, an old property that needs a bit of work. You think it only needs a little bit. You buy it. You then go through that process. And then you realise that it needs a bit more work than we actually think. And we finished up doing a complete renovation.
Yeah.
The house that was lived in when we bought it by another family finished up when we were ready to start building inside it. We had 4 walls and a roof.
Okay.
And all the rest is a voyage of discovery. But great fun. Took us a year with a full team of tradesmen. It was brilliant.
And how long did you, when you bought it, how long did you think it was going to take?
I thought it was almost a few weeks. And in fact, what happened, we bought it in the February.
Yeah.
I ordered the kitchen to be delivered in the beginning of May.
Yeah.
And the kitchen was delivered in October.
Okay.
So that gives you an idea of my project planning skills. But nevertheless, the result was fabulous, and I learned an awful lot.
Yeah.
We were there for 3 years, and then in 2008, I thought, well, okay, let's look for the next chapter, and I saw an advertisement online for a real estate agency, an estate agency for sale in Pau.
Okay, yeah.
And I'd been to Pau. It's a beautiful city. They call it the gateway to the Pyrenees, and it really, because it's only about 40 or 50 kilometres or 30, 40 miles from the Pyrenees. And so I bought the estate agency.
It was quite a big jump at the time, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, I'd worked in property in Australia for a few years, back in the late 80s, early 90s, but then we jumped right in, and I went from corporate life to owning a small business, which has been brilliant. So we've been here now for 8 years.
Yeah.
We have 2 offices. We have the office in Pau, and as you mentioned, and the office in Larens, which is a tourist town at the right into the foot of the Pyrenees, about 45, 50 kilometres apart. So we live in the area. We've been welcomed by the French, and it really is just of course I'm biased because I live here, but it's just a wonderful part of France, and we love it.
No, I mean, before we started this interview, we were next door buying a chocolatine, which most areas they're called pain au chocolat, so you're probably known as like a chocolate croissant maybe, and we're in the queue and someone comes up to Tony and says hi, and you have to do the kisses either side, so you're quite a well-known person, I would say, around here now.
Well, it's important. It's a business of relationships.
Yeah.
So it's important, but the people are really good. It's like anywhere when you're from outside, from somewhere else, it's important to fit in. I found that the best way to do that is to learn to speak to people in French. When I arrived in France from Asia all those years ago, I didn't have a word of French. I didn't learn French at school, and I didn't use it so much when I was working in Paris. It wasn't needed, but since then I became sufficiently comfortable in the language now that I can buy and own and a small business, and spend most of my working days
I think that's
in French.
quite an important thing. I mean, there's tourist French. You can go and ask for a glass of wine and etc. But I've always found the hardest part of speaking another language is on the telephone. So you're obviously having to deal with that and speak to. It's taking it that next level.
Yeah, indeed. And I have clear memories of the first time I was trying to deal in French on the telephone when I was living in Paris.
Yeah.
And I have clear memories of the perspiration running down my neck as I thought, this is so embarrassing. However, plunge in, get it wrong. As long as we try, the French, like anywhere, they will try to help us.
Open up to you, and
they do, and many of them speak a little bit more English than they will let on. But you only learn that at the end of the conversation.
Sure.
When they say thank you very much in their very charming accent.
They suddenly actually speak fluent English, and you didn't realise.
Yeah.
So on that, anyone who is thinking of moving to France, what would you say? Breaking into the language, what, good 6 months, you'd say, sort of until you got a good understanding? And
yeah, I think that, well, some people seem to pick it up quicker than others, but the key thing for me is to immerse oneself in the language. So not just, of course, when we move to a new place, it's easy to find people from our own country of origin. It's easy to find other English speakers, but I do find that by doing that, we miss the real core of living in another country.
Yeah.
So it's very important, and not everyone has the opportunity of having their own business in France, but I do think that it's important that we mix as much as possible with the locals, and we get ourselves a reputation for being decent people, and the French are wonderful. They will be very welcoming, and they will encourage us. Yeah.
Okay. No, because so obviously talking about the business. Like most places in the world, people who are buying and selling, they will go to estate agencies. There is this thing, I think, with a lot of French people, there's this undermarket where they'll just pass it on to other people, and suddenly everyone's an estate agent, and you kind of get word of mouth from who's listing what. It's not on the market. It's like my neighbours, I think, were selling their house, and I said, who's it with? Oh, it's not with anybody. Well, how are you going to sell it? Well, I told a few people. For you, obviously it's very important to get to know everybody, and obviously you've been very successful if you've been here that long.
Well, and I understand, yes, in France there is quite a sizable market of people who will buy and sell without agencies, for sale by owner, etc. However, it depends very much the property, it depends very much the market, it depends on the buyers and the sellers. Most of your audience, I imagine, who are listening to this today are probably not in a position of being able to spend days and weeks driving around the area looking for property. So if you don't use an agency, you waste an awful lot of time just trying to find the property. And I've been a seller when my house in the Charente, when we sold that. So I understand the temptation of trying to sell directly, but it just doesn't work. It just is. Of course, anyone who rang me, they would say, oh, tell me about your house. And of course I would tell them how wonderful it is, how it's perfect for them. But of course, it isn't. Maybe they didn't have the finance, or maybe they were looking for something bigger or smaller, or with more land or less land. So by using an agency, eventually I sold the property easily without, because I let them do the hard yards.
Yeah, no, for sure. So I always try and advise people to use professionals, and you can cut corners, but like you said, it's going to take a lot longer. So, how is the French property market over here at the moment?
Yeah, it's a tough market, like anywhere in the world, really. I think and where we are, it's not one of these markets that's on fire like the big cities of the world, like London or Sydney or Paris, perhaps. However, there are plenty of properties available, there are good properties available, and there are plenty of buyers as well. So it's a market that is moving along quite nicely. There are always people who are coming and going. There are always motivated vendors or non-motivated vendors. There are always motivated buyers, and there are always people who are absolutely no hurry at all. One of the most common comments that I hear from particularly French buyers and sellers is they have a wonderful phrase which says, "Je suis pas pressé," which means I am not in a hurry.
Yeah.
So, and of course they use that to start the negotiation.
Yeah. Puff the cheeks out as well.
Exactly.
Okay. So, anyone listening then at the moment, how does one go about buying a place in France? What's the process? Obviously, around the world, you match a buyer and a seller, but there's that in a market where it's very different. So, what is that in France?
One of the major aspects of buying a property in France is that the law requires that all the property transaction eventually goes through a person called a notaire.
Yep.
In some countries, this is not necessary. In some countries, we can do our own conveyancing. But in France, we must use a notaire for that process. It's a good process. The notaire does all the work, all the property searches, make sure that that property is who says they own it, does own it.
Yeah.
That there are no plans for any major infrastructure projects in the back garden or anything like that. So that's one of the great things about the French system. But essentially, it's quite straightforward. Once the property is found and the terms and conditions are agreed, so the price is agreed, everyone's happy, the notaire is then briefed hopefully by the estate agency, who then says, gives them all the details of who is the seller and who is the buyer. The notaire then prepares what is commonly the first contract, which is commonly referred to as a compromis de vente, which is really just a preliminary contract that says that both parties sign, which says that these are the details, this is the vendor, this is the buyer, these are the terms and conditions, here's a description of the property, etc. Once that is signed, the buyer, by consumer law in France, has a legal period of 10 days in which they can cooling off period.
Kind of like buyer's remorse. Yeah?
Exactly.
Oh dear, what have I put an offer on?
We'd like to think that rarely is invoked, because we'd like to think that by the time you sign, people know what they're getting into. But nevertheless, that exists. So that 10 days will pass, and then the notaire will commence doing all of their work. The buyer will have a responsibility, if they need financing, to obtain their finance, to search for their finance. And generally, then, in about 3 months, 2 months sometimes, 4 months other times, but about 3 months later, so it's a longish process, but all the work's done in that time. And at the end of that time, the notaire gets us all back together again in the same room, and we sign what's called the acte definitive, or the second contract, which is the point at which the buyer puts their money on the table and the seller says, here are your keys. Mm-hmm. And then you are the owner of the property. I mentioned the notaire. The notaire is a legal representative. It is not necessary to have one's own notaire. The notaire is independent. Is independent, and the notaire can work for, and often does work for, both parties, because in fact the notaire is really working for the state. Yeah.
I know from a British point of view, you have each party has their own solicitor, which I suppose would be the closest thing to the notaire. And I know British people kind of get a bit sceptical, thinking, well, is he going to be acting for me? But like you said, he's actually acting for the process, and
indeed,
to get that through.
Yes.
So when people make an offer, is that is that binding, or what? So I view a few properties today, and then I quite like one, and I know you've got that cooling off period. But how organised do they have to be up to that point? Because I mean, in England, unfortunately, you can go and I don't have £10 million in the bank, but I can go and view a £10 million property and put an offer in and kind of be a tyre kicker in many ways.
And that can happen here also. Unfortunately, the role of one of the roles of the estate agent would be to try and filter those people out. So before we do the visits, before we negotiate the transaction, would be to spend some time with the buyer just to ascertain exactly what they're looking for, where they're looking, why they're looking, what they're going to do with it, and how they're going to finance it. But you're absolutely right. There's the possibility exists that someone can make a visit on a property, even make an offer, even sign, and then cancel, which would be very much a shame for everybody.
I think another big difference, obviously, when you're listing a property, you're listing that, obviously with the owner of the property, and it's them that kind of agree the amount of commission they're going to pay you. But essentially, at the end, it's the buyer that pays your commission. That's what I found when I obviously paid. I find that system a lot better because you as an estate agent, most of your dealings essentially are going to be with the buyer. You're working obviously to get the deal done, but you're working kind of for the buyer in many ways, and they're the ones that pay your commission. That's kind of a big twist from the English system, which I prefer in many ways.
A lot of people find it curious that we do seem to work for both people, the vendor and the buyer. But you're absolutely right. When we do a listing contract, it's with the vendor, but in any market, it's the buyer who puts the money forward. So it's the buyer who pays, if you like, the commission of the agency. But then technically it's the vendor who pays us.
Okay, I think as you can probably hear, we're in a quite a loud cafe in a village here. So I think we're just going to pause for a second, and we're going to go and find another quieter corner somewhere, so you hopefully can hear more what Tony is saying to you. Back in a moment. Sorry about the excess noise. We've now moved outside, so from having some British cyclists chatting away rather excited. They're excited at the minute, but they haven't gone up the mountain. We might actually get some sheep in the background noise at the minute, or you got the French bells as well. So welcome back, Tony. Off air we were talking about the difference between that you experienced between French buyers and international buyers, and that was quite interesting. So you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
As I was saying, it's we work with both French buyers. We're a French estate agency which just happens to have a couple of foreigners who own the place. So we work a lot with both French and foreign buyers. The big difference is that we see is that French buyers, they know the area already where we are. They know the Pyrenees Atlantique, which is where we are. They grew up here, or they work here, or their families from here, or they used to come here on vacation as kids. So I
won't need any background noise music on this one, will I? We've got they're really doing some bell practice in the background now. Exactly. Sorry, no, carry on.
Yeah, exactly. I'll just speak louder. Foreign buyers, on the other hand, wake up one morning and typically will say, "Come on, let's go and buy a house in France. We've always wanted one." So.
That was me a few years ago.
Well, exactly, and who will arrive in the area and say, "Well, I know the sort of property I want, but I don't know where it's going to be." So they look everywhere in France. Frankly, my advice before they, if you're thinking of buying a property in France, do some research on the different areas. Every area has its own strengths and weaknesses. Of course, I'm biased, and I love this area because we have the mountains, and yet we're only an hour from the beach of Biarritz and those famous coasts. But do some homework, because there are big differences. Like any market, any country, there are big property differences between buying in the southwest of France or buying in the southeast of France, or buying in Paris, or buying in Normandy. So do some homework on the areas, and maybe that also will help explain some of the differences of what's available and how much it costs and things like that.
Yeah, that would save a lot of time. Yeah.
Of course, anyone who wants to talk to me about that, I'll talk to them all day about the benefits of of being in this area.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, one thing, and obviously I've got a property in the area now that I liked about it is it just feels quite real around here. I mean, I lived in Provence in Saint-Tropez for 2 years, and it didn't really, you felt more like a tourist over there. Whereas, as much as I am a tourist when I come here, I don't come for long periods of time. It feels more like home. It's very welcoming, and That's the attitude. What I find anyway.
I do think. Well, you have a point. It's an area that has not a massive population. It's very outdoorsy. People who like to do outdoors things. I mean, we just talked earlier. We bumped into this group of cyclists. They're here riding on some of the great, famous routes from the Tour de France, which passes by here very regularly.
And they're smiling at the minute. They're just getting on their bikes now, and they're going up. Is it the Col d'Abyss?
They're going over the Col d'Abyss, which is a famous climb. It's about 17 point something kilometres, all uphill. But it's quite an achievement, and they'll do themselves proud.
They won't smile halfway up, will they?
No.
I'm guessing they're probably going to stop at the ski station Gourette on the way up, maybe for a little break. No?
They could well do.
Like you said, I've driven up it, and windy roads are quite challenging in a car.
Yeah, but the roads in the area, and that's another. I mean, I sound like I'm working for the tourist office, but the roads in the area are really excellent, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that, well, generally French roads are good anyway, but also in this area they keep them in very good condition because the Tour de France comes through almost every year. Pau is one of the, apart from I think from Paris and Bordeaux, Pau has more tour stops.
It's
than any other city.
And the Vuelta passed literally Le Mans last year.
It did indeed.
And finished up the Col d'Abyss.
It did indeed. Yeah. So it's cyclists love it. People who like to walk. There are skiers in the winter time. It's whitewater rafting, canyoning, all sorts of outdoorsy activities. And as I say, not far from the coast. As an Aussie, it was important to me to be not far from the ocean. Not that I go there all that often.
I was going to be clever and say you can't surf here, but you can actually, can't you? It's not too far away.
You can surf down at the coast, absolutely, and that's less than 2 hours, and you'd be in the surf.
I must confess that when I often like yesterday, I flew into Biarritz, and I've got my fins with me because I quite like bodyboarding. And on Wednesday, if the weather's good and the waves are right, I'm going to hire a wetsuit and a board and jump in on just before I go home. Yeah. Hopefully, until I put my ankles in and it's quite cold. Obviously.
Well, that's okay. You'll warm up.
But yeah, no. So we are in a pretty much an area of I would say outstanding natural beauty. There's so much leisure that you can. Outdoor stuff you can get, you can do as well. But also we've got the spas here, where we are here next to Le Mans, which two neighbouring towns which kind of compete together. And I mean, the little village that I have a place in, I did a bit of research, and I think it was Napoleon III's wife who I think was behind the architecture of Biarritz, and also Auchot, which is the town where I live.
Exactly.
In,
Any village that has a name that translates to hot water has to be a pleasant place to go for a spa.
No, for sure, yeah.
And the other one that you mentioned is called Aubonne, which means good water. So no. The spas and the thermal spas in the area are quite well known in France. People come from all over for a nice relaxing time in the spas.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the architecture, and the area also was very well appreciated, Pau in particular, by the city of Pau, by the Brits in years gone by. Many people, well, maybe many people do know, but many people may not know that the golf club in Pau is the oldest golf club in continental Europe. So outside of Scotland and the UK, the Pau Golf Club was founded clearly by a Brit all those years ago, and so there's still an influence in the city and in the surrounds.
My neighbour tells me that every time I mention golf, actually. So I haven't played there yet. I'm not the best golfer, but so yeah, you've got the odd golf course scattered around as well. So just flipping it back to properties, what we're obviously talking about, as a foreigner buying in France, are there any sort of restrictions that you can or you cannot buy, or is the market open? Or
no, the market is open. To buy in France is generally not a problem, as long as like anywhere, the finances need to come through in an acceptable format. So many people will take a loan if they need financing, they will borrow the money in euros, which seems to be the preferred option by many people. That way the currency fluctuations don't really impact so much. And a lot of people these days have available funds, so they're cash buyers, which also works fine. There are many currency traders who can help out in that sense. But in terms of owning property, no, you don't need to be a resident, or you don't need any particular legal status. I'm from Australia. There was no restriction on my buying property. If you want to live in France, and if you're not with a European, if you're not from a European country, then that may have an impact on how much time you can spend in the country at any particular time. Because I've been here for the length I have, and because of my work history, I do have residency in France, so no issue there. But even so, even if you just wanted a holiday home in France, or were a retiree, nothing to stop you buying a property in France, and then perhaps every 6 months or so just pop over to another country and have your passport stamped and come back again. And so there's absolutely no issue in ownership.
No, that's great. So obviously between the two offices that you have, obviously Po and here, I mean, what's the big difference between the two?
Well, the big difference is in terms of the type of property. The Po and the area around Po, we cover an area roughly 50 kilometres or so, a radius out of Po. But that tends to be people looking for a principal residence. That tends to be people who are moving here for retirement, or a lot of people come and want to set up a small business, like doing a gîte business. A gîte is an independent accommodation, so almost like a holiday flat as part of the property. So there tends to be a lot of that. They tend to be bigger. They tend to have a bit more land with them. They tend to be a bit more expensive. Around Larens, it's a lot more holiday homes or second homes. So a lot of apartments in the mountains. A lot of maybe smaller properties, smaller budgets. People. Generally, though, in both markets, the sort of people that we work with are people who are not necessarily from the area originally. They're not currently living in the area. Hence, as I said earlier,
I can hear the bells of the sheep coming. Actually, can you? Yeah. There's a big fountain in front of us here where the sheep, when they're coming down or up the mountain, they quite often stop for a little breather, and no doubt you might hear the bells in the background
they'll be coming down the mountain. We're coming into the period. In the next few weeks, we have the Cheese Festival of Larens, which is held every year at the end of the summer to celebrate and participate. And they make a lot of sheep's cheese in the area. It's very well known for that. And the animals, the sheep and the livestock and the goats and the cattle and the horses, spend the summer months up in the high country, and so the pastures down in the valleys can recover. And this is the time of the year when a lot of the flocks and herds come back.
Yeah. Well, last night when I arrived at 11 o'clock at night, I was sailing through. Everybody was asleep. There was nobody on the road. And I just turned a bend just before I got to my house, and there were a whole load of sheep coming straight at me. I suppose it's kind of a local traffic jam in many ways.
It is. It is.
I didn't count them all, but I've got a rental car, and I didn't take the insurance out, the excess one, and I'm thinking, oh dear, these sheep, which they've all got horns, most of them, and I was thinking they're going to scratch the car quite badly. But
they don't. They seem to know their way around the cars. Yeah.
But, I didn't open the window, but you could smell them. Let's be.
We're in the countryside.
Be subtle on that one. So to entrance level. So I mean, like in Po. So let's say I'm looking to buy a 1-bedroom apartment, for example. What a good solid flat. What that's going to kind of cost?
Right in the centre of Po, for example, walking distance to the historic centre of Po, a 1-bedroom apartment on maybe the second floor of a walk up an old building, maybe around in pounds 50,000, in euros 70,000.
Okay, so it's pretty quite a let's say affordable. It's
we're not talking Paris or London here. This is no, but of course you can pay more than that and less than that. It depends on what people are looking for.
It's actually quite attractive, probably then from an investment point of view. I mean, like let's take that one bedroom on the second floor, a rental of that. On a monthly,
you could probably fetch sort of 5% return on 4 or 5% return on that.
Okay.
It's a university city, Po, and so there are lots of students. There are a number of people who buy investment properties and then rent them furnished for maybe 10 months of the year, and quite a lot of that also in the mountain areas. Down around Larens, where people rent them, use them themselves, rather than long-term rentals.
And kind of like an Airbnb kind of scenario.
That's the
short-term in here.
Of course, long-term rentals are equally possible, but certainly renting furnished accommodation to, whether it's to students or whether it's to seasonal workers or other, for holiday makers, there's quite a market for it.
Yeah. No, okay. And then at the other spectrum, like I was going to say like a 4-bedroom house, but I don't suppose that exists as such. So one of those, that you said you deal sort of quite a wide radius there. I mean, a property with a gîte, for example, that you were mentioning.
But that's, for 300,000 euros, 400,000 euros, fully renovated, operating gîte, a hectare of land or thereabouts, just less 30 minutes from Po, they're available, and there really are some nice properties in the countryside. There are other properties that need renovation, and of course, correspondingly a different price point. But even at the high end, a year or so back, we had a property that had 6 bedrooms, indoor pool, 2 hectares of land, and all of that for 600,000 euros. So it's certainly, as a lifestyle decision, there are some properties in the area that would quite possibly fit most budgets and most people's ideas of what would be the good life in the southwest.
No, for sure. We did have a little chat before about that horrible B word, Brexit, before we came on air. Have you seen any British people? Has that had an effect on them purchasing out here or inquiries?
We haven't seen much change at all. Everyone talks about it, but we still have plenty of people who are coming into the area. And they're serious buyers. There's been a suggestion recently that I read that, and I guess it makes sense, is that in order to take residency in France, maybe Brits who are thinking about coming to France, they might say, well, if we jump in now, we can get our residency before we have to go through the process of being a non-European, still European, but not a member of the EU, and therefore maybe, because we simply don't know, that maybe in the future it might be not so easy to take up permanent residency. As I said earlier, it's possible, and people do it, and they live here, and they simply they work around it. But no, Brexit has it has effects in both directions, frankly, and even with the currency fluctuations, people coming into the market are maybe adjusting their sights on what they could buy, but also at the same time, people who are leaving the market are also adjusting their sights on what they expect now to get for their property. So we've had several vendors, Brits, who have said, well, we're moving back to the UK with the change of the currency rate. They are now in a position to accept a slightly lower offer for their property, simply because they're saying, well, now we can do what we want to do back in the UK. So it swings and roundabouts.
Yeah, I find that. I mean, like in England, when it happened. The confidence kind of dropped, but then one door shuts, then there's an opportunity for someone else. So it's like dollar-based clients in London at the moment, because of the currency exchange, it's very favourable.
Yeah.
So you have a different buyer coming in. So there's always that opportunity, and I suppose that's the same.
Well, indeed,
essentially.
Indeed, and we have quite a number of foreign buyers who are already in the euro. So for them, nothing changes.
Yeah. No, that's true. I suppose you get Dutch, Germans,
the Dutches, and the Germans, and the Belgians. Yeah.
They've already got their euros already. Okay, so you mentioned obviously when you're looking to buy, do some research before you come. And yes, I was reading a magazine on the way out here, and it was saying about it's not uncommon to be looking in one town and then driving. You don't want to be driving an hour and a half to the next town. So it's obviously find out where you want to buy, try and narrow it down as much as possible. But on the flip side, what about things to look out for? Anything to buyers should be people are, if they're spending big money, they're maybe a little bit wary. What's the not the don'ts, but anything that they should be prudent about maybe?
I think in any, I can't think of anything especially important that people should look out for. I think it's important that it's a major decision to buy property in any market. I know people, and we have a good laugh about it because they're very, very happy with property they bought. But I know people who say to me they just fell in love with it so much so they bought it with they spent more time buying their dishwasher than they did the house, and of course we we laugh about it, and I laugh about it with these other people, and but fortunately they are very, very happy with what they bought, the house. They love it. But my advice would be just for people, take their time, find the right property. But when they find the area they want to be in and they find the right property, it's like anything. If it's time and they're ready, then don't hesitate forever, because someone else might also come along and say, well, I like that one as well, and I'd hate you to miss out. Yeah,
I think it's the big thing. It's the head or the heart purchase, and I suppose in many ways it sounds like Poe is kind of more the head purchase. People kind of who need to be, they have a definite need, whereas maybe around this area, leisure purchases, it's more of a heart purchase. Would you say?
Well, I think most people that I'm fortunate enough to work with are buying with their heart. To be honest, I mean their head will eventually provide some limits on things, but there's almost no two properties the same. So it really in the end comes down to saying, well, let's have a look at a few options, and one of them will grab the buyer's heart or whatever, and hopefully all the buyers, if there are more than one, make the same decision. Yeah, no, for sure. So you lived in France, for some time now. I guess this is home, essentially, for you. Yeah, we go back to Australia at least once a year. Well, normally for Christmas, and that is brilliant because it ties in Christmas with the family with summertime. So I like to say that we benefit from having 2 summers a year. Yeah, but otherwise, no. France is home for us. We've been here long enough now that we have settled in very readily, and as I said earlier, the people are very welcoming. We're used to the fact that sometimes regularly some of the shops are not open at between midday and 2 p.m. But we get used to that. We work with it, and you were telling me about the butcher store you had when you first moved to Paris. I found it really curious at the start that shops, which we would think as being open almost 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, would be open for maybe 8 hours a day, but be closed between midday and 2 because, well, it's lunchtime, and so we have to have lunch. Which in many ways, when you're in France, that's a big part of it, isn't it? So it's... Absolutely. My bank opens on a Saturday, so therefore they don't open on a Monday. Yeah, makes complete sense. Yes, and the post office is closed at lunchtime, and initially we all indignantly were saying, well, when am I supposed to do my postal things? And the post office would say, well, when we all do, which is sometime else, but not between 12 and 2 because we're not open.
That's very, very true. I remember, cycling up from my town to the next town and essentially eating lunch in France, which is a big part of their life, is kind of done between 12 and 1:30, I would say, isn't it? 12 and 2, depending where you are, I suppose. I got there 10 minutes late, whatever time it was. I mean, it was quite a big hill. And yeah, the cheeks puffed out and said, no, well, obviously you can't have lunch now.
But then after all, it's their country, and we are guests here, and so we work within that. And of course, once we come to terms with that, we do, and we work within the system, because there's no point in fighting it. It's too stressful.
Yeah. I think that's it. The first few times you kind of think, well, that's not right, but then I think you get to love it eventually. I quite appreciate having, in England, I remember being an estate agent years ago, and you're having a sandwich at your desk, and that could be 3:00 in the afternoon because you've got too many viewings. Whereas here, that's it. Phone's down, out you go, go and enjoy yourself and relax a little bit and have a bit of lunch, right?
It's a quality of life question. If I am in the office in Po between 12 and 2 and the phone rings and I answer it, I have had people genuinely surprised, thinking that they were going to leave a message. But to have someone answer the phone, it was quite a surprise. And if they happen to walk into the office during that lunch period, they are awfully apologetic for interrupting my sandwich.
So it works both ways, I suppose, in that sense. Well, we are coming towards 12 o'clock, so we've technically got half an hour until lunch. If you are looking to buy in this lovely area of France, Tony, you want your website and how can they get in contact with you?
Well, certainly the website is www.agir, which is spelled AGIR, -france.com. So it's www.agir-france.com. We're in, as you know, we're in Po and in Larens, so we'd be more than happy to chat with anyone about anything really, but specifically about property in the area or about just living in France.
You're listening to The Property Show with Matt Turner of Astute Property Search, helping people save time, money and stress when buying real estate in London.
Okay, so I'm back from my French travels now, and so if you've been out to France and you've been looking to buy a place, or maybe you were a bit cheeky and you put an offer on something, how do you go about buying that? Well, one option is obviously to get finance. Very pleased to say that I'm with Felicity Sullivan of International Private Finance. Get the words right. How are you today?
Yeah, very well, thank you.
How can we help people who've maybe put an offer in on something? It's possible to get mortgages from the UK to buy in France?
Yes, it is, exactly. So we are based here in the UK, but we specialise in arranging mortgages for non-residents normally who are looking to buy a property in France, and we work with all of the French banks that will lend to non-residents. So it would be a euro mortgage that you'd have to take out as opposed to borrowing through a UK bank. In terms of the sort of process, it's fairly similar to what you're used to in the UK. I'd say the biggest difference between a French mortgage and a UK mortgage is that you have the ability to fix your mortgage for the life of the loan, which that's obviously something that we can't do here in the UK. You'd sort of fix for 2 or 3 years and then you'd look to refinance.
Okay.
So it does give you a lot of security.
What are interest rates at the moment? What sort of rates are on offer?
They've actually had an all-time low and have been for a while now, and I think that's going to be the same for certainly till the end of this year. They are at about 2 to 2.5%.
That's fantastic.
Depending on the bank, and if you can fix that for 20, 25 years.
Wow, it's cheap money at the moment.
Yes.
So in many ways, it's a good time to get out there and find your dream home.
Yes.
I mean, on that, are you mainly? I mean, do you do investments in France, or is it mainly people's lifestyle purchases? What's the sort of the?
I'd say majority of our clients are buying something that's going to be a holiday home.
Yeah.
It's something that they can use with their family. Might be something that they want to rent out whilst they're not using it. I'd say certainly clients that purchase in the Alps and south of France on the Côte d'Azur.
You're making me want to go skiing.
Yeah, I know. It's doing this job makes you want to buy something and move down there straight away.
I mean, how did you actually get into the industry? I mean, you got any affiliation with France? Or?
Yes, I studied French and German actually at university, and I lived in southwest France on my year abroad. I lived in Agen. Which is between Bordeaux and Toulouse, and I taught English in a school. Made me realise I didn't want to be a teacher, which I think a lot of my friends felt as well. But I loved it.
For the whole year as well? Or?
I was down in France for 7 months, and then I went to Berlin for the remaining part of the year. But I loved it. I mean, I was in a tiny, tiny rural town called Fumel, which was in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, exactly.
Did they have a little speciality they cook there?
They used to cook, what was it? It was duck fat wrapped in some kind of meat, and with a prune in the middle.
Oh right, okay.
I mean, it was lovely.
I did spend some time in southwest France during my university year as well, and I had a funny story actually talking about duck. French wasn't great then, and we'd come home and spoke to the French teacher and said, "Oh, what did you have for dinner?" And we're like, "Well, we're a bit worried because the guy said, he said renard." Which obviously, if you speak French, is fox. And I mean, obviously you eat frog's legs, snails, and we were thinking, well, if we eat fox, but then she, mentioned to us that it was actually duck, which is canard. So, we were a little bit relieved. But lovely part of the world down there. So then, so you finished university and then got into?
Yeah, so I actually used to. I've worked for IPF for a number of years. I started when I was at university. I did sort of temping here during my summer holidays.
Got your foot in the door.
And got my foot in the door, got the experience. I knew when I graduated that I wanted to keep using my French, and this obviously gives me that opportunity to use it every single day. So.
So I mean, I suppose you liaising with the French agents then, I suppose, once someone puts an offer in.
Exactly, yeah. We sort of guide someone through the whole process, really. So the banks, all of them are based in France. They do speak English, but I think it's always nicer if we can speak to them in their language. So I'm speaking to the banks in French. We also spend a lot of time dealing with the notaires in France, which can be a challenge sometimes. But I
suppose all the paperwork's all in French as well, isn't it? When you're
exactly.
Buying, so. And
most of our clients, to be honest, because they're based here in the UK, they don't necessarily, they may speak French, but it's not technical vocab that they've got. So we try and help them as much as possible with that.
So when do you kind of get involved? Do people come to you before they've actually found a place, or is it a case that they've put an offer in on something and then you evaluate it then?
So it really depends. I'd say at the moment we've seen lots of people wanting to get their mortgage approved before they even start going and looking. So we'll get lots of clients that say, I've always wanted to buy something, I want to get a really good idea of my budget. So they'll contact us in advance of going over to France, and we can then put an agreement in principle in place, so we can actually apply for the mortgage, get that financing agreed, and then they'll go over and say, okay, I've now got that mortgage from a bank and I can make an offer quite confidently. We do sometimes get clients that are a bit later on in the process, perhaps they've signed a compromis de vente, and then they come to us and get the financing. It just means then we've got to work a little bit more quickly and get that in place.
Yeah, and I think is it right that you can put an offer in on France and there's a condition that if your finance doesn't go through that they can then pull out? Is that
exactly? Yeah. So if you are buying with a mortgage, you want to make sure you sign the compromis with a suspensive clause. And that basically says you're applying for a mortgage if, for whatever reason, something were to happen, you can pull out and your deposit's protected.
Make sure you put that clause in there, I suppose. But I guess most of the agents will advise you on that.
Certainly, it's very common.
But it's okay. And what kind of loan rates can people take out? What's the maximum?
So maximum loan to value is 85%. If you are someone based over in the US and you're sort of living and working there, you're a tax resident in the US, you're probably looking at more like 80%. There are, I think, lots of US clients are perhaps concerned that they won't be able to get a French bank. I know clients come to us who have said they found it difficult to open a bank account in France if they are based in the US. It is possible. It doesn't stop you from being able to borrow. It is just that there are perhaps fewer banks we could approach for the mortgage. Okay,
so, I guess that's just the standard documents they need. Birth certificate, blood sample.
It is.
Not that. But
it's a paperwork heavy process, unfortunately. I think the UK is changing in the same way though. That compliance has stepped up, the regulations stepped up, so they have to have complete transparency on your situation.
Okay. I mean, and obviously you're dealing with the whole of France, which is a huge country. I mean, are you seeing are there any certain areas of France that are more popular that you're seeing than others?
Yeah, I think at the moment, certainly myself, I seem to have lots of clients that are buying in the Alps. I think it's the type of year for it, is that people want to buy something that they can then use as a family, but also then look to rent out, ready for the next season. So this time of year is always popular for that. The south of France is always popular, the Dordogne, obviously with Brits. Lots of Brits love the Dordogne.
It's got like kind of anglicised name. I can't think what it is right now. But,
there's like a village where there's lots and lots of British people that are there, and
the French call it like an English town. I can't think of the name now, but
so those are always popular areas, and I'd say in terms of the properties over there, in the Alps and in the Côte d'Azur, the market's more similar to the UK, whereas in more rural parts of France, properties will stay on the market for a lot longer, and it's interesting.
And what kind of budget levels? What's this kind of the standards? How much are people paying in France? I mean, what are you dealing with? Sort of $500,000, or is it the top end, or what's the...
Again, it completely depends from area to area. I think certainly in rural parts of France, people are paying 150,000 for a property, and I'm always amazed when they send me the photos. I'm like, wow, I need to get down there and buy something myself. But it really does depend. We have people that are then buying at really top end of the market on the Côte d'Azur.
Okay. I mean, what from your experience, what should people be doing when they're out looking for properties? Anything they should avoid, or you have any sort of tips for them when they're out looking in France? Because obviously, a big place, and I guess location's probably one thing to look at. But.
Yeah, definitely, and certainly for the banks as well. It's important for them. They've got to think about the resale value of the property. If something's to happen, they've got to repossess. I'd say one area that is very difficult is if you're looking to buy something that you want to renovate. And lots of clients, there's that program at the moment on Channel 4, I think, the Chateau program, where someone's renovating a chateau, and that seems like an amazing dream, but it can be very difficult to finance something like that. So I'd avoid perhaps a chateau or anything that needs a lot of renovation, because the banks just don't want to get involved. They're so nervous of any sort of properties like that.
Just sort of a risk element, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly.
I suppose if it was finished,
they'd much rather something that you can walk into and move in straight away and don't have to do any work.
Yeah, no, okay. And I mean, let's say someone had been down there and they bought it cash because they just that was what they wanted to do at the time. Can you remortgage properties as well?
So no, the remortgage market, that again is a big difference between France and the UK. I think it's a cultural thing as well, that in the UK we're used to seeing properties as an investment and being able to access that money at any time, take out the equity. The French just don't view properties in that way, so it's very difficult if you do own a property and you want to perhaps take out some money for renovation work. It's pretty much impossible with the French banks.
Okay.
If you buy something and perhaps then in a couple of months' time you want to take out a mortgage, that's slightly different. The banks will offer you a post-finance. Okay. So you could look at taking out some mortgage within sort of 6 months after you've purchased.
Yeah, so it's not like in England where you think your property price has gone up 100 grand, you think, well, let's take some money out, and you can't use it. And what kind of fees are involved with purchasing with a mortgage? Are they, because in England, quite often you have to pay £2,000 for a certain product, or how's it work?
So yeah, like in the UK, all of the banks will charge an arrangement fee, and it's normally a percentage of the loan amount. It's normally around 1%. Clients often think, oh God, that's really expensive. But again, because you're not in the UK, you'd have a mortgage and you're remortgaging it every couple of years. France, you don't do that. So you're really paying that fee once.
Okay.
There is an arrangement fee. Again, brokers will also charge, like in the UK, you'd expect to pay a broker fee as well. The only other cost to sort of bear in mind, which is perhaps slightly different to the UK, is that life insurance is obligatory when you take out a French mortgage. So that's just another sort of ongoing cost that you've got to consider.
Which is a good thing, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
For the future and what have you. I suppose in many ways you've got quite a teasing job. You must get to see some fantastic places, and it's raining outside your window here in London, and south of France, 300 days of sun. Are your only aspirations to be buying overseas? Yeah,
definitely. I always think, if I didn't love my job here so much, I'd definitely move back to France and live there again. I love it.
Kind of work remotely, no? Would it be possible?
Yeah, perhaps. I need to talk to my boss and see.
So you do mortgages in France. I think you do mortgages in other countries in Europe as well.
Yes, exactly. So Spain and Portugal as well. Although France is really seems to still be the most popular destination for certainly for Brits to buy in.
Oh, good to know. So when I fly off to France, Spain or Portugal, I'll come back and we can talk about that. So that's fantastic. And how can people get in contact with you, Felicity?
So best way really is probably via our website. People can go online and sort of fill out an initial form. So the website is www.internationalprivatefinance.com. We've got lots of information on there. Telephone number if people want to sort of call us directly, 0207 484 4600.
That's great. So it's just +44 and drop the 0 on that telephone number. And if you do go on the website, there's some fantastic videos that could, very informative. So thank you for your time today, Felicity. And if you need a French mortgage, there's no better person to get in contact with. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye bye. So I hope you found today's foreign venture both enjoyable and useful. Next week I'm back in London, no doubt with some holiday blues, but if you are thinking to redecorate or refurbish your home, or even about to put your property on the market, make sure to tune in as I'll be interviewing Siobhan Casey and Helene Dabrowski, two UK-based interior designers who share their tips and experiences. The marketplace takes me to a part of North London where it is still possible to buy a 2-bedroom house of £350,000, a price that some people in central London pay for a parking space. So have a great week and thank you for joining me as Matt Turner on The Property Show on UK Health Radio.